in his first year of college, he calls back and he says, Mom, there's so many kids that don't know how to learn because they can't memorize the basic facts of what's in front of them.
Welcome to Classical Etc. You're in the studio with Memoria Press.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Classical Etc. I'm Jessica Gardner, and I am joined today by Tanya, Paul, and returning guest, Mrs. Carrie McGraw. Hey, Carrie.
Hi.
Welcome
Glad to be
back.
back. Thank you.
We just had you.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm excited about today.
Yes, Carrie serves at Memoria Press as our homeschool liaison, along with many other things that I'm sure are on your plate, including conference planning.
Mm-hmm.
How many weeks out are we?
Are we less than 2?
Less than 2.
Less than
Whoa.
2.
Is it really less than 2? No.
I don't know.
We've
Is
got
it-
2 more weeks.
Okay.
We have 2 weeks.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right.
2 weeks from Monday.
2 weeks from Monday. Yes. Yes. But my busies start, well, it's just constant. It's just constant happy and constant prep. So it's
I believe
like
that.
when, that Monday rolls around, I'll have already been here Sunday and it's okay. Let's just keep rolling.
Keep going. Oh, well, today we're discussing memorization, why it's such a valuable part of educating a child and how you can incorporate it. But before that topic, we always talk about what we're reading. Carrie, what's on your bookshelf
Well,
today?
seeing as it hasn't been too long since I was here previously, and previously I had to disclose the 2 very large reads that I'm doing with our homeschoolers for our homeschool book club. And I am still in Anna Karenina, okay?
Of course.
And finishing just about done with Lewis's space trilogy. And then I am going to catch up as much as possible in middle March.
Oh,
Remember,
good.
that one's coming
Yes.
around. I'm going to be there for that. But I also picked up, and I do this very often, I pick up just a very small side read, one that's more personal, spiritual, focused. This is a time of frenzy. So I picked up a book by Father John Bartunek called A Quiet Place. No, it has nothing to do with that silly movie, which I will never see.
Oh.
But it's just about how daily prayer can change your life. It just recenters me. So, at the end of a busy day, these small books that remind us of the things that need to remain within our crazy lives are really important. And I was trying to read that Hideous Strength and Paralandra and all that before I went to bed. That was not smart because they're very action-oriented. And so I decided, I think I need something calmer by my bedside. And so I picked this one up and I'm appreciating it very much because, prayer obviously is part of all of our lives. Prayer is part of our curriculum. But, I'm that kind of person where before we had Bluetooth in our cars, that big speaker in the sky that we talk to all the time, I was talking to the big guy in the sky. So I'm sure that I got all sorts of strange looks and all the time. Because it just, I have a constant conversation with God. And that's what this book is kind of about.
Oh, just abiding.
Yes, it is.
That's wonderful.
So that's what I've added, but I still have to get through the others.
And you will. You will. After the conference.
No. Next week.
Next week. Okay. Oh, Tanya, how about you?
I'm still reading Great Expectations.
Oh.
And I'm about 200 pages in. I don't like it as well as David Copperfield, so then that makes me think, should I change one of those high school summer reads from? So I need somebody else to read Great Expectations and David Copperfield and tell me if it truly is that. I think it's just that David Copperfield is autobiographical, and so it just feels more meaningful maybe to me. But I don't know. I mean, I can't judge. I love Dickens and I don't really remember the plot of Great Expectations. I read it in college when my mind was really on other things. So we'll see. And I've read a lot of the Great Tradition in the past couple of weeks because I was supposed to be in Oxford right now delivering a speech on lifelong learning. And so I was trying to find, some great quotes about that. And I kind of went down in that Great Tradition hole. It's really great about education. Yes, I was really glad that I did that, even though I didn't go to Oxford, so now I don't have to give the speech, but I'm ready if I ever do.
It was a fruitful project.
That's right.
Oh, Paul? Listening, reading? What are you listening to?
I've been listening to, I haven't been reading much. I want to get back to that shop class, the Soulcraft book, but I've been listening to Man, Cattle, and Veld. See, I knew that reaction was coming from Tanya. It was written by a Zimbabwean rancher.
Wow.
And it's about grazing your cattle and things, but what's really interesting about it is it starts off with a whole section on man and man's relationship to nature and how man can really screw things up if the goals that the man sets is not what is, it does not mimic nature. And he had this.
It sounds very Wendell-Berry-ish.
In some ways, yeah. But it's much more, I don't know, the right word's not scientific, but like it's very data driven in the examples he's bringing out and stuff like that. But there was one quote that I was like, I have got to memorize this because I want to bring this up. He said, man's mind is like a parachute. It only works when it's open. And I thought that was really, I mean, that's what we're trying to do with liberal arts, right? We're trying to, teach people to have open minds and be able to reason through things properly. And because, I mean, he's in the book, he's pushing back on a lot of academic agriculture practices because he's saying those people have, in theory, those things are the way we should do things, but in practice, that's not actually the way it works. And so he's trying to say you have to always have an open mind of just because experts tell you to do this isn't necessarily what is the best.
And the experts may never have even farmed.
Correct.
That's I mean, it's like education. The experts in
may never be in a classroom.
It may have never been in a classroom before. Why we think? I mean, I think we should just go on back to that apprenticeship thing where you can't be an expert on anything unless you've actually done it. Like start at the bottom and do it. I think Chick-fil-A makes their managers go through every single, like they have to start at the bottom and go through every single job there before they will give them a store.
I don't think they'll even consider you if you haven't.
Right. If you haven't actually done it all, you don't just come in and say, I've got 20 years of management experience. You literally have to make those chicken nuggets. So this leads us directly to Memorization, opening our minds, developing our intellect.
That's exactly right.
Great segue, Paul.
Laying foundations.
You're welcome, Tanya.
From cattle to memorization.
And I want to start with you, Tanya, because I think probably a lot of us, even if we didn't have a classical education, did memorization in school. We memorized states and capitals. We hopefully memorized our math facts. But what is different about the memorization component in classical education?
I don't know that it's necessarily different. We're still memorizing our math facts. We're still memorizing states and capitals. But we're memorizing, at least in my education, I did memorize all those fact-based things, and those are necessary because they do provide the foundation to help you move on to more abstract things without being tied down to what's 6 times 8 when you're doing calculus. So, but we're memorizing. I think the big thing for classical education is that we believe that there is objective truth and objective beauty, and so we're choosing poetry and scripture that will hopefully become part of our students and help them then to recognize those things that are real and true, and just become a help to them.
There's a formation element to it.
I had a friend once who was on a ventilator for a while. I can't even remember what it was. I mean, she was totally healthy. She was in her 40s at the time, I think, maybe late 30s. And all of a sudden, her body wouldn't breathe, and she was on a ventilator. And she told me once, when I went to visit her in the hospital, she said, the only way I survived is I just kept repeating in my mind all the scripture that I knew and all the hymns that I knew, and it got me through. And so, that's a huge value. And I think that is a part of classical education, is that having that, all of that knowledge at hand
Jessica, if I may say, you talked about how, many of us maybe remember back to memorizing states and capitals. I have to tell you, I don't have that experience. When I grew up in another country, I was here for young years and then grew up. And once I moved, there was no memorization. We were done. They had moved on to a system of education that had jettisoned memorization. And that stifles learning for the student without memorization. I think the thing that classical education does, and particularly with Memoria Press, is we are determined and we are deliberate about memorization. This isn't just something we throw in, here, there, and everywhere. It is a deliberate act and skill that we must cultivate for our students to lay the foundation of knowledge in anything. And therefore, when a student comes to a body of knowledge, whether you're 6 years old, 15 years old, or 30 or beyond, there are some basic things you have to memorize. You have to have these facts. And unfortunately, I grew up in an education where we didn't get that. And it was fascinating later on in high school how frustrated teachers were with what we didn't know. And what they had to go back and teach because we didn't have the foundations.
And I think this deliberateness that Carrie mentioned, with us intending memory is contrary to what a lot of modern education is, because a lot of modern education, I think the kids end up memorizing because kids memorize. The little kids don't want to know why. They want to know. They just want to be able to say, "Oh, you asked me 3 times 2. I'll tell you it's 6." And it doesn't matter whether I really understand what I'm doing with 2 times 3 or not. I know the right answer is 6. That's the way they function. I mean, you see this in small kids. I was just thinking about one of our foster kids. She came to us with John 3:16, mostly memorized. She substitutes words here or there, but she likes saying it because it reminds her of her grandmother. It's a wonderful thing, but she doesn't understand what that means. I said the Lord's Prayer the other night and she was like, what's that? But you could tell she wanted to join in and know that by memory, because I knew it by memory. But she, when I tried to start explaining to her, I mean, she just wasn't focused at all on it. She didn't really want to know what it meant. She knew it was a prayer and she wanted to memorize the prayer, right?
Yeah, and the kids love repetition. We talk about drill and kill and, don't memorize anymore. It's very progressive that memorization is a terrible thing.
Really? Right.
Yes, and that it deadens the intellect, but that it's total opposite. And children love repetition, and they love reciting for you when they
drill
learn
and
something.
Excite is what it is.
Thank you. Thank you.
It doesn't have the same ring, but we stand behind it.
But I think people get the idea that when we memorize, that we're not really opening our minds, that we are just like sticking stuff into students and not teaching them how to think, which what we're doing is building a foundation so that then they are wide open to thinking. And at some point, I mean, this is the 5-year-old, the
7-year-old.
7-year-old. I mean, at this point for her, we're still trying to figure out the Lord's Prayer, right? At some point, the excitement of memorizing that will move forward into more abstract thinking about what it does mean and what it means for her life. But now the most appropriate thing for her is to actually have that in her mind to use and just to sit there.
Yeah. And if she doesn't have it later on when she's ready to start abstractly thinking about it, then she's not gonna have anything to think about.
Right. That's
right.
I mean, fundamentally.
Yeah, it's part of the fabric of your brain as you're a child. And then over time, those threads get kind of pulled on.
Yes.
But they're always there.
Yes.
And then they emerge in different times in different ways.
And if they're not there, there's nothing to make a connection to. So you could be reading, but you don't have anything in your head to make a connection to.
It actually frees the mind.
It does.
Memorization frees the mind and provides that freedom for that next level of higher order learning and then later understanding.
Right.
Right. And you said it just earlier. I mean, we always kind of revert back to math facts, Well, it's because they're that important. We're not going to get through algebra. I mean, you go through algebra, and let me tell you, I talk to parents about this, kids that have entered algebra and they never did their math facts. It's like a 10-car pileup. And so
it certainly slows them down.
Right. And it becomes frustrating. And then they hate learning when Paul, going back to, the young ones, what they're seeking is truth, right? This is innate within us. They're seeking truth, and the truth of 6 times 2 or 2 times 3, it speaks to them. And then later on, it has freed them, for that higher order learning. So it really, memorization is the foundation of it's memorization, repetition, and drill are essential to learning.
And we don't just do it in the younger years at Memoria Press. Carrie, can you give examples of how even the older students incorporate memorization?
Well, I do want to say that, let's talk about how that skill, right, how it has translated into the high school years. So we have spent years and years. It's not just that we're giving them facts and figures, which of course your drill and kill, people will say, well, that, hampers conceptual learning. Okay, well, we're going to prove here, that it doesn't. But it's not just that. We've set up years of a skill that they take with them into all of these other subjects. So whether or not we have placed before them a piece of poetry, a quote from a book, which is excellent, which I'm hoping today we talk about some quotes, but or that next level of mathematics or Latin, right? They now know how to attack that material because they have the skills that we have built beforehand. So I would look at memorization in the early years as a skill that they're going to have to use later. So last night, family dinner, sitting down at dinner, and I said, I get to be on Classical Etc. tomorrow. We're going to talk about memorization. And poor Jessica's probably going to have to strap me to my seat because this is like one of my most exciting topics. And my son, who's 20 now, okay, he's playing the devil's advocate. But mom. Now, doesn't that hamper, learning? Isn't it just, and he is sitting there with a half grin on his face, and I just lit into him, God love him. And he says, Mom, I'm just kidding. I'm playing the devil's advocate. You're so ready for tomorrow. He said, Mom, I use it all the time. He's an engineering student.
Yeah.
A junior in college, and he's in Air Force ROTC. He has to, one of the first things he had to do is memorize the entire command structure, of the Air Force. And the only thing that he could fall back on was that skill that had been placed in him, and he uses it all the time. In his first year of college, he calls back and he says, Mom, there's so many kids that don't know how to learn because they can't memorize the basic facts of what's in front of them. And so this, you ask about high school. I'm trying to give that vision of beyond.
Yeah.
Okay. Because there is a big beyond.
But they do memorize also. They continue
Absolutely.
to memorize poetry
Yes.
and scripture all the way through high school.
And Latin
Absolutely.
vocabulary.
Yes.
And formulas and science. And
There's
Every
plenty of
single
content.
Shakespeare play that
Yes.
they read, they memorize something from it. They memorize part of Dante when they read the Divine Comedy.
opening lines of Iliad and Odyssey.
Yes, they memorize the first lines of the Aeneid in English in the 8th grade, and then they memorize it in Latin in the 11th grade.
And
so
they-
we do continue to.
Well, and I mean, to Carrie's point, right? Like, and I know this analogy is overused, but memory is like a muscle, right? And if we talk about these kids, young kids like to memorize, right? And it
They
excites
do.
them. But if it's not used, it atrophies, right? And then by the time that they're really developmentally ready to focus on the concepts, that muscle is no longer there, sitting ready and ready to be used. Whereas if you just keep using it, I mean, it was fascinating. When we moved out to the farm, I mean, Sarah, she was admittedly weak. She couldn't lift a lot of stuff, and now, I mean, she just lifts. I mean, she doesn't struggle anymore. I mean, and you could actually see the growth of muscles over a period of a couple of years, just, just using them.
Just using
And so
them.
even if you're older, even if you have a high schooler that hasn't memorized much, like you can practice
You can
that
start.
and get those muscles.
It is never
moving.
too late.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It is
but
never
it is
too late.
weird to me that in athletics, it's all about repetition
Mhm.
and
muscle
doing the
memory
same thing
and-
over
yes.
and over and over. But
Practice,
then we
practice.
criticize it in the
In-
classroom.
Or
Amen.
music, you know?
Yes.
Yeah,
music.
so many
Yes.
disciplines to
Mhm.
be anywhere near
Right.
proficient. You work and work and
But
work.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
But for some reason, we think that that doesn't apply anymore at all in the classroom and shouldn't. Like
your
we
intellect.
can't be proficient in our brains either unless we've exercised them.
I mean, to speak to music in the Suzuki method, the children, they don't even try to start learning to read music until there has been plenty of listen and practice and repeat. And that it's just another method, but it's the same thing that we're employing here is why are we trying to skip, 5 steps ahead and try to read music before we don't have the muscle memory to understand what's coming next. And that's what memorization does.
Mm-hmm. Zooming out, we've kind of circled around this, but zooming out to the big picture of forming a human being, Tanya, how does the discipline of memorization form them in an ultimate sense?
In an ultimate sense?
Or maybe that was really final. But I mean, when we think about the big picture as if how this is shaping them.
Oh, I have this quote. Thank you, Jessica. I was like, I don't know. I do have a quote that I wanted to read. So thank you for segueing to that. I just had totally forgotten. So our 6th graders memorize Horatius at the Bridge, 70 stanza poem. That really is the ultimate of what they meant, what we asked them. We never asked them to memorize more than that. Again, that
After
is-
6th grade, it's all
after-
downhill from there.
That's right.
exactly
That's right. Much shorter
They've peaked.
passages. They do Paul Revere's Ride, I think in 5th and then 6th. I mean, it's literally Horatius is it. And then they memorize other things in 6th too, smaller things. But that's, so this man his name is Robert Charles. He was an assistant secretary of state under Colin Powell. And he knew a student here who memorized Horatius.
Really?
And he wrote an article that's on our website, and I don't know the name of it. I think you could probably just put in his name and come up with it, about the triumph of memorizing Horatius at the Bridge. And he says that it is a triumph of the human spirit, of self-discipline, self-reliance, resolve, persistence, and personal commitment, or in a word, heart. These elements define a true leader, not just a true scholar. The spirit of can do and never give up also attended Churchill's leadership, and we always attach this poem to Churchill because Churchill memorized it. And he being a military person, which he was before he was Secretary of State.
Let me speak to Horatius for just a moment.
Sure.
This pinnacle of memorization that we put forth for our families. I have 4 children, and although all 4 of them did work on the 70, I only have 2 that accomplished the 70. I have 2 that accomplished the 24, but we celebrated just as much. These were my 2 that have diagnosed learning disabilities, and yet what I'm trying to say is that was so worthy. All of it was worthy. The entire time, the entire study. If they couldn't get to the full 70, I tell this to parents all the time, don't miss Horatius. Our homeschoolers, don't miss Horatius. If the 70 is not something we can do the 24, because you are going to go through the entire 70. But it is so worthy. It's something I don't want any of our parents to miss, or our children. Every one of my kids can still quote large portions of Horatius, not all probably, but large portions. I probably can too.
And it's not just, Horatius is teaching a history lesson also. And Paul Revere's Ride is kind of teaching a history lesson through poetry. So we do several like that, but we also do poems that teach, like for young students, when they memorize the Shaker poem, when they read Lassie, then they're learning through poetry how to be kind to animals, alongside reading Lassie. They read when they're really little in primary, try again. Don't give up. Or Mr. meant to. He meant to put his clothes away, but he didn't do it. The poetry is tightly connected to our curriculum.
Yes.
And so it's all within context too. So it's a great way, because poetry is more difficult than prose, and it's more abstract usually. The elevated language is good, but it also makes it more difficult. So to teach a poem in the context of something else that you're studying makes it easier for students then to tackle poetry and hopefully to get attached to it.
It's more integrated into.
Yes.
Well, and I mean, there's two things that as Tanya was talking that came to mind that I wanted to point out. Was one is what you memorize is important, right? It's not just memory is important, and so put anything in front of it. Like our students will never forget the example of Horatius, who put his life on the line to save his community, right? Until his community could come behind him. So what we're memorizing is important. And the other thing is, Tanya mentioned in context, right? So we don't like to put something in front of our students and say, memorize this and not explain what they're memorizing, right? Now, we understand that they may not, especially when they're younger, fully understand conceptually what they're talking about, right? But we're going to at least try to explain it. Even with math facts, we explain what's going on, what addition is, what subtraction is.
Yes.
And then, okay, now we're going to memorize this, but we're not also going to wait for that conceptual understanding to fully sink in before they memorize. So they're going hand in hand. And because if we were to say one ought to be primary over the other, you end up undermining the other, right? So if it's memory outside of context, well, it becomes meaningless, right? If it's conceptual understanding with no memory, well, then they have nothing to conceptually understand. And so those things have to go together.
Again, it goes back to being deliberate,
Right.
in everything that we do, and integrated and cohesive and everything. And not only you can take that portion of poetry or that quote or, out of context and out of the curriculum, but the thing that does that memory work in that piece, like the Happy Farmer or Try Again. And I just want to say, as a parent, that was a wonderful poem to have. Thank you so much. That's like part of formation. But but when you see it, when the children see it within the context of their education, it makes everything else a little bit more exciting. Because it's so relatable, because it crosses over everything else that they're doing. And I mean, that excitement it continues. I'm not just talking about the young ones. We go back to the high school, and the pieces and the selections that they take with them are just as important.
And in the homeschool setting, Carrie, it sounds like are there ways that you advise parents to do the memory work? Does it differ from a student's experience in the classroom versus in the homeschool?
It can and it should. I mean, in the homeschool, you're dealing with so many different moving parts and children during the day. But we actually, in our summer conference coming up, we have Tanya doing a session on memorization, why and how.
With Stacy Heater.
That's right.
That's great. Yeah. She's great.
And so, yes, I mean, a parent has to look at their day and how they can make sure that is part of their day. But I think I always came at memorization from the standpoint of, I'm not trying. I didn't want to do it. Okay, I'm going to hammer this out for 30 minutes or an hour. No, when we learned a piece, it got 10 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day, 10 minutes. It's that consistency. The consistency has to be there. I would not ask a parent outside of learning the piece, okay, which does take time, to spend 30 minutes on that piece every day. No, just 10 minutes. And the other thing that I did as a parent in homeschooling was everything that we needed to memorize. Once it was learned within the curriculum, I pulled it out. I either photocopied it or rewrote it. I had a large bulletin board. It was posted on the bulletin board so that it was fresh right there in front of us for the week. I didn't have to go thumbing through, the pages again or anything like that. And when we did our practice and recitation time, we were standing. This is how we did this. It received the attention, and might I use the word gravitas, of the moment that it deserved, both the content, as Paul talks about, and the action, right? And it wasn't something that took a lot of time. It just needed that consistency.
And recitation is something we haven't talked about yet, but that is another great byproduct of memorization, because students learn how to stand up and speak formally, and so it gets them on the way to being orators. So that is a big part of it. And I always tell homeschoolers, I mean, it's easy in the classroom. I mean, your students are your audience. But for homeschool, especially kindergarten through second, when they're memorizing those short little verses, one a week, just, that on Friday when it's formal recitation time, that really should be a recitation for the whole family, maybe right before dinner or after dinner, right before bedtime or something, but a time when that child can practice a formal recitation, standing formally and looking your audience in the eye and, all of those things that you can teach, but you've got to have memorized something in order to practice that skill.
Well, and parents will ask, well, what about public speaking? How do I include? I'm like, you've been including public speaking.
Right.
That's what recitation is.
That's right.
This is that presence that a child acquires and gains in confidence to recite, present, speak, look people in the eye. One of the things that we did with recitation and our memory work is we actually set up our own little recitals. And because I had someone on violin and I had someone on piano and I had all these poems and things that everyone had memorized, we moved all the chairs in the living room. We set them up in rows. We ushered in grandmas, grandpas, aunts, uncles, and had a program. I still have the program. And we held our own end of year recitals for homeschoolers because homeschoolers don't maybe get that opportunity, but I think that's great on a Friday. Do it for the whole family, share with everyone.
But I've gotten several Horatius at the Bridge recitations from homeschoolers that were done in that kind of setting.
Wonderful.
Where they had like their little homeschool group had a little recital where everybody recited and they would just record their child doing Horatius so that he could get the medal.
Yeah, had I thought, I would have brought you my program because really, truly, I still have it.
An artifact.
And I remember when I memorized, I don't even think it was 24 stanzas for Cheryl Lowe of Horatius back early. We, now when our students recite it, they go off and they're one-on-one because we got so many to get through, right?
For Horatius,
For
yes.
Horatius.
But then it was you stand up by yourself in front of the whole class and recite in front of 15 other kids, and I'll never forget it. I'll never forget her stopping me, correcting me because my pronunciation was too lax, and
my kids were in Nick, my oldest, was in a little cottage school out in the country. You know which one. Okay, so every week he had to memorize something. And we always got it done. And then we were like halfway through the semester, and the teacher said he's got a 0 in recitation because he has yet to recite anything. And I said, well, nobody, he knows it. But he just, every time it would come to him, he would tell her, no, I don't know it. So you do have to be, because he was terrified of standing up there and reciting. I mean, that for him, the memorizing was easy, but the actual standing up in front of his class was, but he learned to do it because he wasn't going to have a 0.
Right.
And so he did learn to do it. But students are really anxious about that sometimes,
Yes.
and that's okay. And sometimes you do have to give them a little, like every now and then in our classrooms, we'll have a student who just can't do it without getting physically ill. And so, you start out with that student doing it just seated at their desk and then standing beside their desk. And then eventually they are able to get up there. But I wouldn't, cause any kind of meltdown from recitation. But the other thing about recitation, is that it's a very good use of time. It's a better use of time because when they're young, especially, what we want to do is imitate. They don't have, I think any day, memorize a poem rather than journal.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a better use of time. Take something that is well written and worthy of knowing and spend that time memorizing that and then reciting it rather than these crazy journaling exercises that so many people are fond of these days. So the people who call memorization drill and kill are the people saying, write about what you did for the weekend. That is a total waste of time.
You know, talking about imitation, though, Tanya, one of the things that I did for my 2 dyslexics, we used a dead cell phone, and we used the voice memos. And so the things that they had to memorize, I would put into voice memos, and Horatius was one of them. And I did it stanza by stanza, and I was able to label each one so they could hear me at a pace at which they could handle, as they're trying to both follow the words as a dyslexic, and listen to mom's voice. But the other part of that imitation is the rhythm, of speaking is and reciting is important as well, to not develop little drones. And in the homeschool setting, we have a greater opportunity for that, and we definitely have a way of alleviating a lot of anxiety because you're naturally not there. Right. But that's why that little recital time becomes really important. So for a homeschool family to set something like that up, I'm a big promoter of that because then they do get that opportunity of standing in front of somebody. But by the time they do it, they've been with mom, they've been with dad, they've been with siblings, and there's a comfort level. And then there's joy. There's such joy in this process. And again, I'm not talking about just the little ones, right?
So it sounds like this is really a compound task and it's really resourcing them in a lot of ways that are much deeper under the surface and are much broader in their future than just math facts, than just Latin vocabulary. It's really a skill building that just keeps building and building and building and serving and serving and serving them.
And it does serve different. Memorizing facts is different from memorizing poetry. They have separate advantages, but they're both really essential. And as Carrie said, we're not talking about a class on memorization where you're going to spend an hour a day on memory. I mean, you're not. It doesn't take that long. Just a little bit every day. It's the same thing with this classical education where we're just building, we're just walking up that mountain at a good pace. And we get there, but it's a little bit at a time. Yeah,
in every subject. There's something in every subject. And so it just becomes a natural thing that if we're talking about some sort of information, we may consider memorizing it. If it's particularly beautiful or worthy or needing to know for the future.
What a great discussion. Thanks for joining us, Carrie.
Happy to be here.
Yeah.
You didn't have to strap me to my seat. I think I did okay.
No. Thankful.
Maybe I bounced a little.
But you're passionate about it. That's important.
I'm passionate about it.
That's important. And Tanya and Paul, thanks for being here. And thanks for joining us as well. We will see you next time. Thanks for joining us today on Classical Etc. by Memoria Press. If you like what you heard, please like, subscribe, or share this episode or comment. We love to hear your questions and your comments. If you want to learn more about Memoria Press, please go to memoriapress.com. This has been Classical Etc. We're so glad you joined us, and we'll see you next time.